In this chapter, they will take us along an important and necessary journey into the culture and how the order of the culture is being maintained by codes and a power that will uphold it and let it be the defining issue between us as people. And so they, after talking about nature and culture and how we strive to get older, and in that striving we can sometimes create a side effect of disorder or chaos or whatever, we are basically trying to overtake nature with culture, and culture is something that is based on a code. It's based on a way of doing things that is defining for us as a group. So when you sit at a table and have to have dinner with some people in a certain place, you have to adhere to the table manners, as they say. That's the way you eat and talk and what to say and not to say, whether you could pick your nose or should take off your shoes or sit in a distinct way, wash your hands, look in a certain direction, wait for somebody, or be the first to begin, eat with your hands or with something else. Whatever is part of that cultural code that these people have agreed on is the one that they uphold as their culture. And if you differ from that, that means you belong to somewhere else or you are uncivilized. And so it's sometimes the distinction between overtaking nature by a kind of culture and distinguishing that culture from another culture. And here we get the role of the state and the government in protecting and serving that cultural code as if it was the most natural in the world. And this is what they are dwelling about here, the dynamics in sociology and how these ways of doing things becomes very important and central for us. And by understanding them, hopefully we can understand a lot of how we are part of what's going on and what's going on around us. So back to that example with that table manners, it is also a tell sign of which class and which civilization and people you belong to, depending on how you do so. And this is what both Pierre Bourdieu and Irving Goffman has been mentioning in their studies, that we should be aware of, that these ways of doing things are cultural codes. And at the same time, they present the opposite of them. So it's a sign in a system that shows you what you are or are not, and whether you are a receiver of that culture or you are a refuser of it, if you're included or excluded of it. And so these signs in themselves can be really many, and they can be without language in the first. It can be just the look, the auditive, tactile things that you go about. It means, how do you come dressed? What do you say? How do you smell? And how do you look? And what kind of presentable manners have you shown up in? And is it does it really attach to that table manner at that specific place in that specific culture? And we see it a lot when people go wrong in town, as they say, doing things they shouldn't have been doing in a place where they didn't understand the culture, or go dressed in a totally different manner than they should. And so that creates immediately a kind of what they call isomorph. It's kind of two different meanings that opposite each other or go over each other in different ways. So the signs and the symbols play a big role in understanding society and ourselves and our place in it. And so if you look at a sign called no entrance or no entry, well, objectively you can read it as do not go in here, but you do not read from it whether you will be punished or not. And maybe the door won't be locked at all, because what else is the meaning of a sign saying do not enter if the door is locked? But at the same time, if you take the handle, you could be electrified. Or you will find out that you are taking on a closed and locked door, maybe there's also a surveillance camera. So these kind of signs that we find all around us have different layers of understanding that goes together or opposite each other. So basically, if you see a door where they say only entrance for personnel or do not enter here, that means the door is unlocked. Basically, you can go in. Objectively, it is possible, but you shouldn't. Culturally, you shouldn't, and you should understand your place and role, and do not overstep that, because then you are destroying the order, and you're going into a chaotic state, or creating chaos, or maybe the first beginning of overstepping that case. Imagine everyone else is going to do like you, so what will happen to the order that you have created? And that's why you have to adhere to the culture and the codes, signs in it. And so, to understand the meaning of these signs and to understand what these signals means is also to understand the power structure that is around you and how they relate to you and you relate to them. And so we come also to that part where they are discussing a bit about the principle of what they call difference, the differences of signs, that they are never looked at as an isolated issue. They are always in relation to something else. That's a long talk about from Jacques Derrida, the linguistic and symbol researcher who has been looking into these things, but saying basically that if you look at, they give an example here, if you look at a military uniform, well, as a civilian, when you see a military uniform, it's enough for you to understand that you are dealing with somebody who is part of the forces, the armed forces. And this is a person maybe with status. At least he have made more push-ups than you and can outrun you and maybe shoot you down if necessary, or put you down. And then you already crack the code on how to basically approach this person, maybe understand how not to approach or what not to do in the presence of a military personnel. But if you look closer to that military personnel, you will see that he has a lot of other signs on his beret, on his shoulder, on his chest, on the sides, a lot of other symbols that can be a star, that can be some words or signs. And we do not really dwell on that or look into them unless we are from the same background. And so for the military personnel, it's important to distinguish not only who's a civilian and military, but which rank does this military man have in the ranks of the armed forces. And that's why they have a lot of other signs, and so they become the redundance of signs. It means that you have to have like a specific tell sign that shows you your place in a special hierarchy very, very clearly. That can be used positive and negative. Positive is when you know who is in charge of what, and that's the way to uphold the order that we want in the culture. And the more we have of these signs, the more we think we are civilized and more forward going than other cultures who do not distinguish all these things. And so they look at it. And at the same time, if you have a lot of signs that are used in a negative way to stigmatize and isolate and segregate, well, they are seen in a civilizatory perspective as ways of excluding humans from the basic rights to society. And that has been also looked at as well. You're using the codes in a negative way, like the Jewish star, or saying, putting some words on the doors of Muslims or Hindus, or trying to make tell signs of who lives where and why these are not welcome because they do not fit into the code or the culture. And it all goes back to that idea of upholding the order of the culture. Otherwise, it will be chaos, and chaos is the wild nature, and we cannot have that. And so, in every kind of cultural distinction, we get the opposition of it. That means there is another culture or an anti-culture. And so these signs can basically be called arbitrary, or they can go as indexes. And the arbitrary signs are the signs who do not really need to have a special definition beforehand. They are qualities in the culture as a whole, and they can be found wherever you are. It's like a cultural code that you create without a pre-example of it. And so when we are taking over the nature and saying, well, now it's raining, it is a cultural sign. It's a nature sign you're getting, because you can see the water drops falling, or the streets are wet and shining of water. And so when you go to the cultural signs, you can see that these signs are in many ways distinctions that are really taken in, not directly from nature, but based upon them. So we find them as very natural. As we said, if you go to a place and you have to stand in line or sit at a table and eat, the way you do it becomes, in a way, we want to think about it as arbitrary. This is common sense. This is the way to do it. And so our cultural code becomes the natural way of order. And so it's a social way of decoding where we are, who we are with, and how we work with things. At the same time, they are a way of categorizing what person you are and where you belong. And we see that a lot, where some people can judge you by your clothes or looking, or maybe who works with people in the shops and hotels and other places. When they see someone approaching, they can immediately see the tell signs of whether they are rich, niveaurish, making themselves look like rich, just poor people, someone from the street, someone from the neighborhood. They can see the tell signs in a specific way, because the culture is subtle but very defined about them. And you can see them on the behavior of the people, on the look, the visual, the smell, and so on. So this is the one part of keeping the order in culture by using the signs as a very human thing. It's like we decode nature, we also decode our culture by using these signs that we find arbitrary. Of course, they are a creation, a construction, and conventional. They are not really part of the origins as things are, but we make them look like, so we become so-called civilized, because this is the way to adhere to culture like it is nature. The second way of science is the language, and it has a greater impact in many ways, as it was studied by Michel Foucault, Pierre Bourdieu, and also Derrida, that power and language is very tight together, and the language has the power to relate and also define the culture that the language is used into. So like your clothes can be a sign of who you are, the same can the use of language show also what kind of person you are. And that's the genius when we see the beautiful stories of, now I want to mention classical like Shakespeare and the Canterbury Tales. The genius in that is that we can see that they have encapsulated many type of cultural behavior and layers and people from different cultural codes. So decoding what they are saying to each other is easier in between them than for the person standing outside. And we see how people who are working and living on the street will behave and talk and think in a very different manner than the people who are sitting in the higher layers in the presence of the king, or maybe as part of an educated group belonging to the knights, or belonging to a better educated and better equipped group with more means, more resources to be able to develop and make the language differ. And so it becomes also a tool of power and definition to use the language. So it has what they call a semiotic function when it becomes a part of the communication. It also helps you relate not only to communication, but also to the culture behind the communication. And in that way, both in the science of the non-spoken, non-verbal, and the verbal science in language, we can see that it is putting culture as something very well defined and the order very well placed, and it creates a social hierarchy, social layers, social what we call social order. And when they are created and they function and work like that, we want them to become like as if they are nature, because this is what upholds the things as they should be. And that's where the state comes in and has to reform and reassure the culture of its arbitrary meaning. It means that it is well defined and natural and good and forever like this, the best over any other culture. And so the state and the nation and belonging to that nation, the belonging to the nation, nationalism, becomes tools to uphold a culture that we see is very natural, and we want to keep on going with the same signals and signs, but we also come to learn by time that there are other people out there doing the same thing. And so the culture will put its borders up, also as talked about earlier. So sociology is also about borders of interaction, not only openness in interactions. And when they put that border up, they want to go into a state of, or can go into a state of exclusion, xenophobia with X, and the heterophobia, the resistance to difference and diversity. We want to be away from everything that differs a lot, because it is a threat to that order we have created and put up against the wild nature, both of human and the nature around the human. And so to distinguish that, we have to have some power that is central and can uphold that cultural hegemony, as the sociologist would say. It's an effective process that will ensure the monopoly of norms and values in a specific order. And in that way, you will get one kind of culture who is above the others, not really accepting cultural pluralism and intolerant and subordinating all differences under it. And with time, that can also change, because when you meet with other cultures and they become part of who you are, or maybe have an entrance because of the need of it, when you have a big land and you need somebody to farm it or dig the mines, and you get some people from a total different culture, you try to segregate yourself from them, but accept their presence. And so you start a process of tolerance to some limit because you need it. And that cultural pluralism will hit you slowly or quickly, depending on the situation, the culture, the history, and what kind of challenges you're facing as a culture. It can also be when culture meets another culture. It's very necessary to uphold the peace that you are respectful, very tolerant, and understanding that this culture has another way of going about their signals and signs and hierarchies. They do not look like yours, and they do it in a different manner, and maybe you do not find that good or natural or most developed. And so comes the fight over the cultural hegemony, who is best and who has the best culture, as part of what we also see in the world. But basically, the state will want to uphold that realm of monopoly, controlling. It will be a Machtcentrum and a kind of strong element upholding the culture. And it can either be by some strong people, or the laws that is imposed on people to say, well, the laws of our culture states this and that, and everyone who wants to be here has to adhere to these laws, otherwise they will be punished. And so the state will get a monopoly on the legitimate means of power use. That's how Max Weber had put it out, that it is a monopoly on the legitimate means for power use. And by doing so, they can uphold the culture as it is, and people will support it because they know this is in their name and in the name of the better order that they are belonging to. And sometimes they make a comparison to other cultures and they see them as better or less better, or maybe they find some sides of what they have better than they have and they adapt it, or they give over some kind of ways of doing things that other cultures need. Sometimes they fight over it, and the winner will have the standing culture, suppressing the other culture totally to elimination, or giving them a space of living under tolerated circumstances but isolated from the effect on that culture, because they become part of what can be a threat to the culture if they are very much different. At the same time, that state and Macht center that will be the center of the order can go on to the limits of eliminating humans, deportations, prisoning, and executions. And that doesn't seem to the people as a breakout of the cultural order. It's not a kind of barbarism or a kind of what can you say, natural exploitation of in a way of nature where it's just a wild. It's to uphold the cultural order that this state takes on the means of putting down any rebellers or any people who breaks with it, and they can have different acts of violence to do so. So they are on different levels of violence in use of power to show that the culture is hegemonious and is strong and holding together the people how they want it to be. And so this is one side of it, how the state acts. The other side of upholding the culture is the loyalty to it, and that comes from the people or the members. And in that way, they will be called the duties of the citizen or the duties of the member of that state or religion or group. And so it basically means that you help uphold the order by supporting and are loyal to the state and its the execution of its executive act on the law. And also if it means execution of people, well, that's part of the natural order, they would say. So the duty to be loyal to that state and that place and that nation becomes as important as the central power that is holding it together. And so in that way you get the combined effort of power holder and the loyalty to power that maintains the culture. It also means you pay taxes and you try to work for the welfare of the state or the betterment of your common culture by spreading it or giving it over or letting someone educate who you love and like and yourself into it so you can become part of it. And so in many cultures there are different limits on where this citizen is allowed and not allowed. You can have your personal freedoms very limited in one culture and very wide in another. You can have the political freedoms very limited or very wide depending on the culture and what they perceive as a threat. And the same goes with the social rights. Depending on what you perceive as a threat to the social and political and personal expansion of the individual, the state and the laws will limit your access or your behavior. And here we see the contradictions and the opposites in what's going on. Because on one side you want to uphold the culture by these individuals and on their behalf and at the same time limiting their access to the power they really want, because by being part of the best culture, you want access to the best possible way of living, that ideal happiness, or that social structure that is so expanded that you will feel you have a positive way of freedom and manifestation in life. And so sometimes the state becomes the protector and the suppressor of its own people under its own culture. And that is an ongoing wave that goes forth and back. So at the same time, the human under a certain culture can feel protected and empowered, but also suppressed and abandoned. And in that way, we can become in doubt whether this culture is really for our sake or for its own sake, and whether the state is really upholding what we want or becomes the mean of upholding what it wants. So it goes and gets its own culture, and within that culture it becomes different cultures and power bases using the resources they have at hand, so they can stay in that power and expand that certain culture. So it goes from upholding culture in opposition to nature, and in opposition to other cultures they seem as lower standing or wrongdoing, or not really on that level they want to be, and then they go fighting inside the culture, or they have to oppose each other inside the culture, because those who have access to resources like to keep them and expand that way of living and that special sign of culture they have gotten, while the others who do not get it must understand that they do not deserve it, or maybe just get to understand that they cannot go against the social order, otherwise things will break down. And so in the name of the nation, the state, and the culture, you can keep people out of having the share in those goods for their own sake and for the nation's sake. And so everyone will have to accept his or her place in society in that way, or rebel against them and go and try to fix it. And that's what it's called to be a member, a citizen in a state with a culture. You have the influence in some way or another. Maybe it's a very, very little and periphery influence, but in other ways it can become a powerful and important influence on the state and how things are run. If you know the language and the cultural signs, and you know how to achieve being listened to and changing the way things are, you can achieve a change inside the same system and the same culture, expanding your cultural rights. So between these two tendencies that the central power has of suppressing, protecting and suppressing, people also feel that sometimes they can ignore that central power in what's called regionalism and territorialism. It means that you can be part of the state's power but want the autonomy of your area. It's like, okay, we adhere to the laws but do not interfere too much in our local area culture. And the territorial approach is like saying, well, our own culture here, subculture, ethnic religion, language, the characteristics that we have are more important to us than belonging to the main culture. And so the subculture goes in its own way, becoming a very very important to themselves in many ways. They become the culture they are surrounded by and adhering to. And so how does the state really ensure its legitimacy and its power over these kind of people who are part of the culture but not really totally in the culture? And so even in in the national states that really try to make people totally loyal to one idea, one nation, one ethnic group, the person can say, well, I am ethnic from that group. I belong to that nation, but in that nation, I am also more than that. He can like put different words on who or she is, and so in the main culture, there are subcultures. So not everyone from that culture are the same, and we see it when we meet them out there in the world. The first time you meet someone from a nation you want to meet for the first time, well, you take this person as a prototype for that nation. But then later, you meet another and yet another and yet another, and maybe you find out they also belong to different layers, stratospheres, and what can you say, hemispheres, and all that. They belong to different circles in that same culture, and maybe they have a different characteristics that makes them different from the mainstream culture that has the hegemony over the land and over the people. And so we are always in between, like upholding the culture, the signs in it, and belonging to it, using the language and the nonverbal signs, and accepting the supremacy of the state, using the means of power and having the monopoly on doing so, because you as a citizen has no right to go and bring in the law in your own order, in your own hands. That's also seen as a threat to the social and political order, and the culture will suffer under it, because if everyone doing that, will be like the entry sign, do not enter. That means you respect it fully without any other needs for you to have locked doors or surveillance. But because the fear or the knowledge that people do not always do that, well, more measures are taken into account, like the act of punishment that is needed, surveillance and punishment. And so when the state really wants to keep its people together, and the culture surrounded by its legitimacy, they go sometimes to that centralization and the upbuilding of a nation. That means we all belong here because of some certain things we have in common. Basically and mostly it's the language, and it's some other cultural signs. Sometimes it can be in the DNA or ethnicity of the people. Here we are all of this and that color, or basically from this and that background. Maybe it can be a way of clothing, or a religion, or a belief, or a faith that we uphold, to uphold the borders for who we are. And in that we can differ a little bit or a lot, but not beyond that border of belonging to that state. So being a part of a nation is like finding the common characteristics that defines who you are as part of that specific nation, and why the way you do it and the codes you use are the ones that you will get accepted by and go around by. And so we get this system of nation and nationalism that wants to define itself according to what characteristics are in and what are not. And some put it very stringently, like who we are is the language we speak. Who we are is the religion we belong to, or both the language and the religion. Who we are is the language, the religion, and the ethnicity. Or in another order, the ethnicity, the language, and the religion. And so it becomes, or the non-religion. It can be a state that's defining itself as totally secular and atheist, and do not really tolerate religious beliefs. That can also be a possibility. And so that state that makes these definitions has also to define the people in it who do not really live up to all measures in it. So if you're in a country that defines itself in a way of language, and you do not speak it perfectly, like I am with the English language, well, people will know that I am a foreigner and does not really understand to decode everything and every part of the language. But because I'm able to use some American accent in my way of speaking, and maybe repeating and 150 times, because that's the way they do it, well, I get a little bit accepted by that. So when they also see me and see that I am well clothed like any other average person they know, they accept me maybe even more. And if they find out that some of my background, parents or people, have a root in the nation, well, then I am truly in the warmth of that nation. And if they found out that I also have a good inheritance and a lot of resources and know a lot of good people and have some valuables, symbolic, cultural, or economic, well, the nation truly accepts me and maybe makes me the representative of their way of life and promote me as a picture of how they have like developed into that kind of culture that can produce such a person. And the opposite is also true. You can be of that ethnicity but lack on decoding the way of life or going against it in your thoughts or in your cultural behavior, and maybe the choosing of another religion maybe or a culture, then you will be in many ways seen as someone who's opposing the right culture and the civilization it's building on. And so you will be maybe isolated, depromoted, or maybe even deprived of your freedoms, or maybe punished. It depends on how this national gathering see itself and where it puts the limit. And so they talk about what is called the myth of origin of the nation. That becomes very important. History and the symbols of who these people are, like the flag, certain type of food, gatherings in one different spot or another, a picture on the wall or whatever, becomes the defining sign that you belong to this certain national and cultural sphere. And so this myth of origin for the state becomes the empowerment of that culture and what define it and put it as a different from others. And if you want to be part of that, you can either, or if you are per se a part of that because you were born that or have the citizenship of that, you can be what's called assimilated in that culture. You are brought up to take in all these signs and cultural ways, language and behavior, and fit in as best as you can. And not everybody does, because even in those type of cultures, there will be people who do not truly fit in. So what to do with these? And the opposite side is segregation, that you segregate yourself or the society segregate you. That means you are not able to get in touch with the same people and places and understandings. You are not welcome in the group as the others would be. And there is a midway that's called integration. That means you are not a threat to us. You can be allowed to have some kind of your other culture with you as long as you still adhere to some other parts. Like if you say, I adhere to the laws of the state, I want to work for it, and I will be part of society and not do anything that's not according to the law, despite that I have another religion or culture, well, you could become a productive and useful workforce, and you can even be permitted to have some goods and abilities to some freedoms in that society. It depends on the society and what it looks at as a threat. Some societies can be very intolerant to what is a threat and what is not. And so in that way, they go about telling us about how culture goes in and forms the individual, and the individual at the same time become a representative of a certain culture because of the codes, the non-verbal and verbal codes, and the central power that is manifesting that culture, making it look strong and good and the natural one among others. And then it has to put its limit out to make sure that people adhere to that culture but do not interfere with it or become a threat to it. And they have also the monopoly of power given by the people of that culture, directly or indirectly, to be able to use it in case something is being wrong or threatening that loyalty and that upholding of the culture that we, in a way or another, belong to.